Steel by Marcus and Mack, voted Best Personal Injury Law Firm in the Best of Indiana County contest. Marcus and Mack, a law firm representing injured people. Dr. May, good morning.
Good morning, sir.
It's good to have you with us here today. I wanted to talk today about, in particular, young people, and it's a subject we touched on last week, but I want to get into it a little bit more in depth with IUP right here in town,
right.
And with so many young folks coming to town, and for them it's their first time on their own in their entire lives. We might think back to the time when we were in college and not think it was such a big deal, but in truth, we might just not be remembering the stresses that are involved in life, and stresses don't seem to ease off as time goes on, do they?
No, they don't. And I think that that's true. As time goes on, we tend to make the memories get rosier sometimes of certain times of our lives, and we forget the struggles that go with that. The transition from high school to college is a major life transition, and we see that in the kids that come to college, breakaway in freshman year, on their own for the first time, away from their families, away from their support systems, their traditional support systems, and trying to find new friendships, new connections, new roles with new academic stressors that go with that. And it's a stressful time. Now, it can be a great time. It's a wonderful time in many ways, but it does provide a challenge for young people that are coming in, getting away from their kind of natural support systems, the support systems they've known most of their lives, and entering a new phase of their lives. So that's just a normal, stressful time anyway.
It's pretty rare that a group from a school, as was the case with my sons, a bunch of them from the same school all came to IUP at the same time. And so they had that built-in support system that came with them. For most college students, it's their first time around a whole bunch of strangers, and they get thrown right into it.
Right. You get thrown right into it. And, you know, there are a lot of individual differences. You know, there are some kids that are like natural ability to connect. They just, you know, they're able to do that. It's not that difficult for them. Others, it's a little more difficult making new friends in a new environment. And particularly, it's not just coming to make new friends. You've got new academic challenges, you know, you're sorting out who you are, what you're going to be doing, you know, and you're exposed to a lot of new experiences, some of which can be very good, some of which can be not so good. And we see that with some young students in a freshman year in particular come in. They don't eat very well. We talk about the freshman 15. You know, you lose your structure, and so you start eating like rotten stuff all the time, you know, lots of junk food, gain weight. And also then you sometimes end up being stressed because you've got these academic things that you're learning about, and so you get kind of start having more anxiety. Anxiety is not uncommon, by the way, in general when this transition occurs. That's restlessness, worry, discomfort, and that becomes part of the process as well that you have to deal with. Now, there's also something that's very important, too, and this is something, of course, in my world, in the world of psychology and mental health in the community, at the Guidance Center, where we worked with individuals who struggled with more serious and persistent types of mental health concerns, is that in the late adolescence, from 18 to 25, is a particularly vulnerable period for the emergence of some of the major mental health problems, like depressive disorders and schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. So sometimes, unfortunately, the time where you're in the window of vulnerability for more serious mental health problems to emerge, and that's more of a biological, genetic kind of thing, you're also at a time of great stress and away from your support system. So those two forces come together sometimes, and we'll see kids that are just away from school for the first time develop depression for the first time, you know, and they are away from their support system, so they don't really know how to address it or how to talk about it. And the IUP has a great counseling center, but a lot of kids don't know to use that resource. And that's sort of a barrier. I don't know what's wrong with me. Maybe I'm just stressed. Maybe I'm just not doing so well. Maybe college isn't right for me. You start going through this whole series of questions in your head. And really what's happening is you might be struggling with depression that's coming out. And if that's addressed, you'll do okay. But you have to recognize it.
There has to be a way to get through to anybody in that sort of a situation about the resources available to them. And they're having, in some cases, the courage to actually open up and use those resources. Otherwise, you're trying to handle things on your own.
Right. And I think that's the dilemma, is that, you know, at any age, it's difficult to ask for mental health help. I mean, I think there's this notion that it's not as bad as it used to be, Todd, but this notion that, you know, if you have a mental health problem, it means you're weak, or, you know, you should be able to handle it yourself. And that's absolutely not true. The brain's an organ of the body things happen in the brain just like any other body organ. And when things aren't working well, you need to get some outside help to sort things out. And I think IUP does a good job, advertising the counseling center and our local resources. But there's this embarrassment that goes with initially asking for help. And if you're not surrounded by people who encourage you to get help, then that also adds another layer to the problem. And also then, of course, we can't talk about freshman year in college without talking about the exposure to substance use. You get away from the structures, you get away from your family, and, you're exposed to alcohol, you're exposed to cannabis, you're exposed to other drugs, maybe not for the first time, but it may be more prevalent in this social system in college. And so you have to remember that sometimes people turn to those things in an effort to quell the anxiety. Of course, that just means instead of one problem, now you've got two.
Yeah. Let's talk about loneliness, because certainly a college student can be alone in a crowd, just like anybody else. You're in a crowd of people, and you're probably more alone then than ever. Is there a parallel between that and, say, an older person who is on their own for the first time after having lost a spouse?
Yes, very much so. Loneliness is kind of loneliness. It's different at different age levels, but still, isolation and loneliness, when you're disconnected from people, you're trapped in your own thoughts. You're trapped in your own world. And when you become in that place, it's very difficult to get feedback from how things are really going with you and in the world. If you rely just on yourself, human beings are not particularly really good at self-monitoring. Mm-hmm. We practice it, we try to do it, but truly we need the feedback from others to know how we're doing and how we could be better. That interaction with people at any age is restorative. It keeps our brains more alive. It keeps us more engaged. And social media is fine, don't get me wrong, but there's nothing that will substitute for a face-to-face with being with people and talking with them, interacting with them. You mentioned you can be in a group of people and be alone. You can be if you don't make the effort to connect.
Yeah. For many young folks as well, although this does also apply to older folks, it's their first time having a romance in their life. Mm-hmm. In high school, maybe it's not nearly as pressurized as it is when all of a sudden you're on your own. He or she is on their own as well, right. And you're trying to decide, is this the person I want to spend a good portion of my time with or even my life with? And taking risks such as, do I risk rejection here when I don't have my normal support system around me, can be a really big decision.
Well, we feel things much more intensely when we're younger. And so relationships are always a risk. Whenever you go to connect, there's always a chance things will go well and things won't go well. And so that kind of fear of rejection is often a reason people remain isolated, because even though they want the connection, they're afraid of the pain that comes with loss and the loss and of rejection. And I don't know of any people that have gone through any development in forming relationships and permanent relationships that don't experience some type of rejection or pain in that process, because it's a natural part of the process of growth. When you interact with people, you will experience disappointment, you will experience joy. And those are the both kind of equations that build relationships. It's beautiful, but it can be challenging and difficult at the same time. That's what makes us human.
Talking with Dr. Ralph May this morning. It's Mental Health Awareness Month. We're focusing specifically on young folks alone in college for the very first time in their lives. I want to talk about masking, because certainly anybody this all applies to all aspects of society. We're focused upon young folks now. But masking can be such a dangerous behavior, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you start portraying something you're not, then you're trying to establish a connection basically on an untruth. And no relationship will survive anything if it's based on untruth, if it's based on a distortion. It's very difficult to put yourself out there as who you are, because you're afraid you'll be rejected for who you are, and that's very painful. So if you become something you're not, it's not quite so painful if you're not liked. Well, okay, I wasn't really being who I was. But if you're not who you are, or at least trying to be who you are, then the person doesn't know who they're connecting to. And that builds a relationship, or attempts to build a relationship, on the basis of a very weak and unstable foundation.
Let's talk about, you mentioned a couple of resources in the course of this conversation. Of course, IUP's main session is over,
right.
and many of the students who might normally hear this won't at this moment, but maybe they'll pick it up in another format. But IUP offers some tremendous resources within the community. There are other resources that folks can draw upon.
Right. Of course, my old agency, the Community Guidance Center, which is the local community mental health center, we serve IUP students, a number of IUP students who after they finished at the counseling center and need more or their needs are more intense, will come to see us. The Open Door has mental health crisis services here in Indiana, which is the 24/7 number, which we talk about all the time, is a great resource in this community. You can call at any time and talk to a person right here in the community. 988 is great, but that's DC, that's away from here. Our crisis number is right here in Indiana, so people know the Indiana area, they know the lay of the land. And so you've got plenty of local counseling agencies. You've got the hospital, Neuropsych Associates. There are a number of available community resources for the students. It's not just IUP that has to take care of them. So if the counseling center is not available, and say we have students here now, there's other resources in the community. You can access that by calling the crisis number. Even if it's not an emergency, they can give you information about where the resources are available.
We will talk about this when we have another session and a little bit more time, but the opening of the new mental health facility at IRMC is going to really change a lot within the mental health community.
This is a long time coming, Todd. I've been here working in Indiana since 1987 in mental health at the Guidance Center, and this has been something we've wanted for decades. Because if you had to be hospitalized because your symptoms were severe, even if it's just for a few days, you had to go to Katanning, you had to go to Clarion, you had to go to Du Bois. We'll have our own full-range psych unit for adolescents and adults here. And it also will accept people who are struggling with dual issues, which means if you have a mental health issue and a substance use issue, you also have access to inpatient here. This is a game changer for Indiana and for the region.
We'll look forward to that conversation with Dr. Ralph May. Thank you so much for the visit this morning.
Hey, thanks for having me, Todd.
It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS 101.1 FM, AM 1160, WCCSradio.com. Community Guidance Center, the other resources you mentioned, very easy to find.
Easy to find. I want to repeat the crisis number because it needs to be repeated all the time. It's 1-877-333-2470. That's 24/7, 365 days a year.
Thanks, Dr. May.
Thank you, sir.
It's Indiana in the morning. It's WCCS 101.1 FM, AM 1160, WCCSradio.com. 24 and a half after 8 o'clock. Boomer Sports on the way in just a moment. Jake in the newsroom coming up, too.
This is Boomer Esiason with a Sports Minute. This is the WNBA's most highly anticipated season in memory, spurred on by